AS Film Production Evaluation. Question 1. In what ways does your media product use, develop or challenge forms and conventions of real media products? Genre. To develop a sense of how we'd go about making our openings comply with genre conventions, we deconstructed various film titles of different genres, as the idea for our film didn't really fall into a single genre. We were aiming for something that would primarily be a post-apocalyptic thriller, but we would also blend elements of drama and action, so we needed to look at a range of influences. We looked into many films within these genres, such as Seven, A Clockwork Orange, No Country for Old Men, and The Book of Eli, to name but a few. Some of the films we looked at helped refine what we wanted to achieve, whereas others only gave us more of an idea of directions we didn't want to step towards, such as A Clockwork Orange. Our possible locations were all derelict buildings, and we didn't have a budget for a set or anything too extravagant, so we didn't decide to go down the route of A Clockwork Orange. Considering the location we had on hand, though, we aimed to establish our film as a thriller by creating a bleak atmosphere inspired by the opening of No Country for Old Men and the interior shots of Seven. Thrillers like these evoke a psychological impact by immersing the viewer in unpleasant settings, be it showing a building in disrepair or a bare landscape. So here's No Country for Old Men.
I was sheriff of this county when I was 25 years old. Hard to believe. Grandfather was a lawman, father too. Me and him were sheriffs at the same time, him up in Plano and me out here. I think he's pretty proud of that. I know I was. Some of the old-time sheriffs never even wore a gun. A lot of folks find that hard to believe. Jim Scarborough never carried one, that's the younger Jim. Gaston Borkins wouldn't wear one up in Comanche County. I always like to hear about the old-timers. Never missed a chance to do so. You can't help but compare yourself against the old-timers. Can't help but wonder how they'd operated these times. There's this boy I sent to the electric chair at Huntsville here a while back. My arrest and my testimony. He killed a 14-year-old girl. Paper.
As you can see here, the long shots in No Country for Old Men give a sense of isolation with its extending plains, and this inspired us to pull off a similar effect. With our location, however, we had to consider that flat long shots across fields in southern England were almost always going to contain a tree line, at least somewhere, and we wouldn't be able to achieve such a huge depth, so we experimented with other establishing shots. This one in particular still keeps the feel of a disused location, but it makes up for a lack of depth and isolation with a gnarled tree framing the shot to the left, which begins to create an eerie atmosphere with its connotations to death. The messy bushes in the back provide a close border to the rest of the area, which acts as a shroud over what might be beyond here. While we went against what we had originally been trying to achieve, we still managed to comply with other aspects of the thriller genre, thus incorporating a range of features of the location in these initial shots. Still, we were able to pull off some long shots that achieved what we wanted them to. Here, despite the tree line blocking the horizon, the overhead cables and towering pylons still allow the shot to give that sense of depth as they can be seen continuing into the distance. Inside, we wanted to create something similar to the sloth scene in Seven, utilising limited light sources from the windows alone. The effect of this is that when moving from our exterior shots to the interior ones, the suspense builds as the sequence becomes more claustrophobic. My vision for character introduction and narrative. My vision was for this sequence to be in media res, so as the two characters meet, the shots cut to the opening title before the two actually interact. This is pretty common of thriller films, as this small insight into the narrative shows the pinnacle of the drama, as well as keeping with the surrounding story. This is pretty common of thriller films, as this small insight into the narrative shows the pinnacle of the drama, as well as keeping the surrounding story a mystery. Constant anticlimaxes and developing mysteries are key in the thriller genre, and for this reason I think our opening works well for a good pace for the beginning of a film. As for individual characters, there isn't much of a complex reveal. The gas mask character, Alex, which suggests... What? Hold on. As for individual characters, there wasn't much of a complex reveal with the gas mask character, Alex, which suggests that he isn't really the key character, as does the fact that he appears to be searching for something, which in turn suggests that we're building up towards the reveal of something bigger, in this case, the protagonist, Jack. Alex simply walks into shot like this, and there isn't too much of a large reveal of his face. When Jack is revealed, however, we get the initial shot of him and then an eerie point of view shot from Alex. This implies that, at least from Alex's perspective, Jack is someone to be feared, and the audience gets a sense of that too. This is made apparent by Jack's nonchalant slouching, smoking and carefree reaction to hearing Alex enter the room. This increase in suspense is appropriate for the narrative in our opening scene. A film opening that works similarly to this is The Usual Suspects. Kaiser Soze is presented in a similar way, shown constantly in shadow and behaving calmly despite the apparent dangers. Costume. The costumes we used were fairly standard for a post-apocalyptic film style. We kitted Alex out with several bags and some general worn and practical clothes to present him as a traveller in the wasteland. The use of a gas mask feeds into the aspect of mystery that most other elements I've talked about so far have contributed to, but this is probably the most important one, as it is the standout feature on his character. I would also consider it to be quite a common convention of the thriller genre to have an outfit like this, especially in a post-apocalyptic setting. Jack's costume consists of similarly practical clothes, but wears a bandana instead, presenting him as somewhat of a typical rogue character. Again, a standard trope and something you're bound to find in an action film. Editing and titles. The main compliance with post-apocalyptic films in our editing process was the colour correcting. Obviously, given the abundance of overgrown areas, the shots were originally very green, so we wanted to take some of the colour out and increase the contrast to accentuate the difference between highlights and shadows. One prime example of this is the TV series Z Nation. But most productions of this ilk tend to do this anyway. It creates a lifeless tone to match the narrative. We also collected a variety of sounds to use for subtle background noises. These were just realistic sounds that we made using our recordings. For example, the score that I composed also reflects the narrative too, as it is bleak, repetitive, and distant. Most thriller films have similar scores to this, whether they're the acoustic guitar in No Country for Old Men that I showed earlier, or orchestral pieces such as Taxi Driver. Either way, they are repetitive and overly dramatic. The film title appearing at the climax of the scene is a convention of any film that has a highly suspenseful moment, really. The style of our credits was somewhat inspired by those of Fargo, which again show the isolated setting and their wide spacing and simplicity. The way we used our titles achieves a similar effect and sets the film up to be quite serious due to the simple font. The bleak atmosphere further adds to the mystery, creating enigma codes to hopefully attract the audience. Special effects. We didn't use any special effects, they weren't really necessary to our film. No CGI was used, and the costumes and setting were all intended to be natural, and no other effects were used either, as this scene was more just about establishing shots, whereas I imagine there would be a lot of effects used in action sequences later on if this were a real film. We only use basic cuts and long takes here, however, to create a mystery of a moody and realistic tone. Question 2. How does your media product represent particular social groups? Jack is quite a stereotypical lone wanderer character, and although there are only 2 shots of him, enough of his characteristics are shown to hint at the type of person he might be. Despite the apparent hostility of his surroundings, he is relaxing and smoking a cigarette, and his scruffy facial hair portrays an air of apathy. This calloused appearance is very conventional of the genre, comparable to the apathetic look of Eli in the Book of Eli. Note how they both have similar basic clothes and unkempt facial hair. In the Book of Eli, Eli spends a lot of his time alone, sitting without a care where one would assume to be dangerous areas, which is what you see Jack doing in the opening of our film. This reflects the character's independence, confidence, and possible experience in a dangerous world as they both seem rather unfazed. Jack even laughs upon the arrival of a somewhat apparent threat. However, Jack's character does not represent any social groups, as the story is set in a fictitious world and his ethnicity is unclear. Although being male, this could reinforce the stereotype of him being tougher than a woman, and so complies with some conventions. The contrast between Jack and Alex is that he's not wearing a gas mask, and this suggests another hardiness about his character. Question 3. What kind of media institution might distribute your media product, and why? Given the nature of our film, we need to function on a medium budget, as we would want large landscapes and a variety of costumes, as well as props and effects for action sequences later on in the film. Yet the costumes would not have to be too expensive, as we wouldn't need to feature a lot of CGI. A production company may be directly responsible for organising the fundraising for most aspects of a production, such as budgeting, scheduling, scripting, and the organisation of staff, and are often either owned under contract with a media conglomerate. Warner Brothers is one of the leading production companies in the world, and because of this, they make a huge range of movies. However, a company that huge is not exactly necessary for us, and it would be difficult to try and get such a vast company to be interested, plus we aren't looking for a massive budget. Momentum Pictures are among the top distributors in the UK and Ireland, who release around 20 theatrical films a year. They have produced many thrillers and horrors in the past, such as Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, Sinister, and Hobo with a Shotgun, and would be quite appropriate to act as a producer of our film. Many of these films are rated 15 or 18, which is what ours would be, which is what you'd expect from a thriller. The 3 aforementioned films have widely different budgets too, costing 90 million, 3 million and 3 million respectively, as Momentum Pictures produce a lot of lower to mid-budget movies. Question 4. Who would be the audience for your media product? Thriller films often attract a wide demographic, and when studying the demographics in the past, I found that males aged 18 to 29 were our main target, closely followed by middle-aged males. In my opinion, the former would likely consist of young friends who want something easy and enjoyable to watch together, be it at the cinema or having a few drinks at home, and something with a lot of action is usually the go-to in these situations. The latter might consist of more of film enthusiasts and critics, as a lot of thrillers contain provoking plot lines and cinematography that those from this demographic might be interested in. Question 5. How did you attract or address your audience? We complied a lot with the conventions of thrillers, dramas and post-apocalyptic films to make the film's aim recognisable. As mentioned earlier, the washed-out look and unpleasant environments make the genres obvious to the audience. The use of long shots is comparable to films like No Country for Old Men and Fargo, and as suggested earlier, it could be a selling point for people who are greatly interested in seeing good cinematography. I feel that Alex's gas mask could be quite a memorable feature and a decent selling point to people in the younger demographic, as post-apocalyptic films often feature a cool-looking character. An example of this could be seen in Mad Max. However, I haven't seen any specific characters who are remembered specifically for the use of a gas mask. I feel like it would be effective in gaining an audience because of this, and also because somebody stalking around in a gas mask looks particularly very eerie. Question 6. What have you learnt about technologies from the process of constructing this product? We used an HD camcorder, allowing us to get a fairly decent quality on our video, and experimented with a range of other equipment, mainly a tripod and a dolly. In our locations, though, it was difficult to use dolly on the grass, and it even vibrated on concrete floors. I imagine that professional filmmakers would easily deal with the situation by affixing a dolly to tracks, but alas, this wasn't an option for us, so we just made do with still shots. But this is not necessarily a bad thing, as this makes a point about location scouting, and we could have been more careful. I found that getting to grips with the tripod made us challenge our previous ideas for angles, and we ended up coming up with a few shots that we hadn't considered at all before. We used Sony Vegas to edit and learned in the process of how much of a difference the slightest colour and brightness changes make. We washed out the colour, making the picture look more bleak, and added a slight green-blue tinge to look slightly sickly, matching with the gas mask and its connotations. We did this using colour curves and colour correction. Audacity was also used to take the wind and noise out of ambient sounds that we recorded. and I also used the same program to edit and record the score. I didn't really know where to start when making it, but I found the trick was just a bit of reverb to make the guitar sound more distant and match the empty location better. This is also my first time using Blogger, and it proved to be a decent site for organising posts in such a way that I could aesthetically customise, making it clearer for myself. Of course, I have used YouTube before, but not as a tool for a project like this. It became a sort of video archive where I could find all of my sources for picking screenshots and easily access everything which I had filmed. Question 7. Looking back at your preliminary task, what do you feel you have learnt in the progression from it to your full product? In general, our shots in our final product are a lot more sophisticated and carefully considered. The lighting was considered more, and by utilising high contrast lighting, we created dramatic silhouettes and shadowing on Alex's mask purposefully and effectively, as opposed to the preliminary task where we had to cope with the dramatic lighting and we didn't really know what to do with it. In the preliminary task, we also broke the 180-degree rule about 2 or 3 times, but we adhered to this in our final product. As you can see, the shadowing and the lighting wasn't very well thought out. We only had to make do with what we had at the time. Our match on action was actually okay in the preliminary task, but we were more imaginative with it this time round. For example, when Alex approaches the doorway, the shot from the other side was framed well to show the deteriorated door frame and the walls. And when he approaches the room Jack is in, the camera cuts to focusing on Jack. You can see him come straight in the background. As he approaches the doorway, we cut to the inside shot of the frame, making the gas mask look more dramatic and the overall setting, such as the dilapidated shelves, more apparent. Another way we were more creative is how we had the idea of creating the illusion that the buildings we were filmed in were one building. In this shot, the light is coming from Alex's left side, and as he turns to the room to the right where Jack is sat. In reality, he walks into a dead end here, but because the light is on his left side, we could make it look like he turns right to the door of another room, but keep continuity using the direction of light and the direction of his path. In the background, you can see Alex walk in towards the door. And because of this and the direction of the lighting, Jack's silhouette here also makes sense. One more aspect that helped was how we actually went out and surveyed the locations this time, whereas with the preliminary task we didn't really know what to do and where to go, and so didn't know if our storyboard would even work, hence why we were left with few options, especially the lighting. We took some interior shots as well as photographs in all the buildings in the area to establish where exactly we would want to film. Even so, we also learned that we should have surveyed even better. This was made apparent by the problems with the dolly that we didn't realise until the first day of shooting. That should be all. Thank you for listening.